Imagine a storm threatening to destroy a community's dream of revival. But one woman's determination and a town's spirit refuse to give up. What secrets will be uncovered, and will the fair truly bring everyone together? Stay tuned for an emotional journey that will leave you inspired. And hey, where are you watching this from? Share your location in the comments below. A snowy winter morning blanketed the small town of Maplewood, Vermont in a serene hush. The streets glistened under a fresh layer of snow, interrupted only by the occasional crunch of boots. Jenna Mitchell, 24, tugged her worn-out coat tighter against the biting wind as she trudged toward the local supermarket. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down not just by the cold, but by the mounting pressures of her reality. Her mind wandered to the emails she had read that morning, yet another round of job rejections. Graduating with honors had once felt like an achievement. But now, with student loans looming and no steady income, it seemed like a hollow victory. The safety net of her hometown offered little comfort, its charm mingling with a sense of stagnation she couldn't shake. As she reached the supermarket, Jenna shook off her thoughts, focusing on the mundane task ahead. Inside, the warm air carried the faint scent of freshly baked bread and pine-scented cleaning supplies. She moved through the aisles, carefully selecting only what she could afford, when a commotion near the entrance caught her attention. An elderly woman struggled with a paper grocery bag, its contents spilling onto the wet floor. Apples rolled in every direction, and a carton of eggs teetered precariously. Jenna didn't hesitate. She dropped her basket and rushed to help, kneeling to gather the scattered items. "Here, let me get that for you," she said, offering the woman a reassuring smile. The woman, bundled in a woolen scarf and an old coat, looked at her with surprised yet grateful eyes. "Thank you, dear. Not many young folks stop to help anymore," she said, her voice warm but tinged with weariness. After ensuring everything was back in place, Jenna offered, "I can carry these for you if you'd like. Where are you headed?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "That's very kind of you. I'm just up the road, Maggie Rhodes," she added, extending a gloved hand. "Jenna Mitchell," she replied, shaking it. "Lead the way." The walk to Maggie's house was short but revealed much about her. She spoke with a quiet energy, mentioning how she had lived in Maplewood her whole life and how winters seemed harsher now than they once were. As they turned onto a side street, Jenna caught her first glimpse of the house, a dilapidated Victorian that stood at the edge of town, its peeling paint and sagging porch a testament to years of neglect. Yet something about it seemed alive, as if it held memories waiting to be uncovered. "Here we are," Maggie said, pausing at the gate. "It's not much to look at, but it's home." Jenna glanced at the overgrown garden and the faint glow of light from the frosted windows. "It has character," she offered sincerely. Maggie chuckled softly. "You're kind to say that. Would you like to come in for some tea? It's the least I can do." Jenna hesitated, glancing at her watch, but something about Maggie's tone, a mix of vulnerability and hope, made her agree. "Sure, I'd like that." Inside, the house was a treasure trove of history. The scent of lavender and aged wood hung in the air. Shelves lined with books framed a cozy living room, and black and white photographs adorned the walls. Each object seemed to whisper a story, drawing Jenna's curiosity. As they sipped tea, Maggie opened up about her life. She spoke of organizing the town's Christmas fair years ago, a tradition that had since faded. "It was the heart of this community," she said wistfully. "But times changed, and people drifted apart." Jenna listened intently, her own worries momentarily eclipsed by the depth of Maggie's memories. There was a weight to her words, a longing for connection that resonated deeply. Before she left, Maggie reached into a small drawer and retrieved a sealed envelope. "I've been holding on to this for a while," she said, handing it to Jenna. "Read it tonight, and if you're curious, come back." Jenna took the envelope, its unexpected weight sparking both intrigue and unease. "Thank you," she said softly. As she stepped back into the cold, the snow began to fall again, its gentle flakes obscuring the world beyond. Walking home, clutching the envelope tightly, Jenna felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. She couldn't explain why, but she knew this moment would lead to something bigger than either of them. Jenna sat in her tiny, modest apartment that night, the envelope Maggie had handed her resting on the coffee table. The dim glow of her reading lamp illuminated the room, casting long shadows on the peeling wallpaper. She eyed the envelope warily, her mind torn between curiosity and caution. The thought of involving herself in Maggie's life felt daunting. Jenna had enough on her plate: her job hunt, the looming rent, and the weight of her student loans. Taking on someone else's burdens seemed like a distraction she couldn't afford. But as the quiet of the night settled in, her fingers began to itch with curiosity. Slowly, she picked up the envelope, her pulse quickening as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, its edges yellowed with age but its words full of emotion. Maggie's neat script flowed across the page, detailing her sorrow over the town's fading sense of community. She wrote about the Christmas fair that had once been the heart of Maplewood, how it brought neighbors together, igniting joy and connection during the coldest time of the year. Maggie spoke of her late husband Harold, who had been her partner in organizing the event. His death, coupled with her advancing age, had made it impossible for her to keep the tradition alive. "I've always hoped someone would take up the mantle," the letter concluded. "But the town feels different now. People seem too busy, too distant. I fear the spirit of Christmas has left Maplewood for good." Jenna set the letter down, her chest tight with emotion. Maggie's words struck a chord deep within her, echoing her own feelings of loneliness and longing for purpose. For the first time in a while, Jenna felt a spark of something she hadn't dared to entertain: hope. The next morning, Jenna found herself back at Maggie's house, the letter tucked safely in her coat pocket. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she approached the familiar porch. Through the frosted window, she could see Maggie sitting by the fireplace, knitting a scarf in vibrant shades of red and green. Maggie looked up in surprise as Jenna knocked and stepped inside. "Jenna, what a lovely surprise," she said, her face lighting up with genuine warmth. Jenna hesitated before pulling out the letter. "I read your note," she began, "and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I think the town needs the Christmas fair back, and I'd like to help." For a moment, Maggie simply stared, her knitting needles paused mid-stitch. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "Do you mean it?" she asked, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "I do," Jenna replied, her own conviction surprising her. "But I'll need your help. I don't know where to start." Maggie set her knitting aside and gestured for Jenna to sit. "Well," she began, "the fair used to be the highlight of the year. We had tree lighting ceremonies, carolers, local crafts, and a big community dinner. But things have changed, Jenna. People have moved away or grown disillusioned. It won't be easy to bring it back." Jenna nodded, undeterred. "I know it's a long shot, but I think it's worth trying, especially if it can bring people together again." Maggie's eyes sparkled with something Jenna hadn't seen before, a glimmer of hope. "If you're serious about this," Maggie said, leaning forward, "you'll need to prove it to me. Start by talking to the people who used to be involved, see if they're even willing to care anymore." Jenna swallowed hard, the enormity of the task sinking in, but beneath the nerves, she felt a growing sense of purpose. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "I'll do it." As she left Maggie's house, the crisp winter air filled her lungs, and her mind raced with possibilities. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving toward something meaningful. Jenna sat at her tiny desk, a steaming mug of coffee by her side, staring at the list of names Maggie had handed her earlier. The paper felt weighty in her hands, not because of its physical form, but because of the expectations attached to it. Each name belonged to someone who had once been a key contributor to the Christmas fair, and each represented a chance to bring the dream back to life. "Here goes nothing," she muttered, pulling her phone closer and dialing the first number on the list. Her first stop was Alan Porter's house, a modest cottage at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. Alan, a retired woodworker in his 70s, had once been renowned for crafting the centerpiece decorations that drew crowds to the fair. As Jenna knocked, the door creaked open to reveal a wiry man with a furrowed brow and tired eyes. "What do you want?" Alan asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I'm Jenna Mitchell," she began, extending her hand. "I'm trying to bring back the Christmas fair, and Maggie Rhodes suggested you might—" Alan interrupted with a dry chuckle. "The fair? That's a fool's errand. People don't care about things like that anymore. Not worth the effort." Jenna blinked, taken aback by his bluntness. "But the fair used to mean so much to the town. Don't you think it's worth trying to recapture that spirit?" Alan sighed, his gaze drifting to the window. "Used to, sure, but times change. People move on. Good luck, kid, but don't expect much." Jenna left feeling deflated but resolute. She knew this wouldn't be easy. Her next visit was to Rose Greenfield, the baker who had supplied cookies, pies, and cakes for the fair in its heyday. The scent of fresh bread greeted Jenna as she stepped into Rose's bakery, but the cheerful aroma couldn't mask the tiredness in Rose's face. "Sweetheart, I wish I could help," Rose said, wiping flour from her hands. "But business isn't what it used to be. These days I'm just trying to keep the lights on." Jenna nodded sympathetically. "I understand. But if we could get the fair going again, it might bring more people into town and into your shop." Rose hesitated, her eyes flickering with a trace of hope before she shook her head. "It's a nice thought, but I just can't take the risk." Undeterred, Jenna continued her outreach. Peter Chang, a music teacher who had once led the children's choir at the fair, was her next stop. However, Peter's bitterness over years of budget cuts to the school's arts programs left him skeptical about the project's viability. "It's a lovely idea," Peter said, his tone laced with sarcasm. "But you're barking up the wrong tree. The town doesn't have the resources for something like this anymore." By the end of the day, Jenna felt crushed. Her enthusiasm, which had burned so brightly that morning, was now a flickering ember. Back at Maggie's house, she sank into a chair by the fireplace and let out a weary sigh. "I don't know if I can do this," Jenna admitted, her voice breaking. "Nobody seems to care." Maggie, knitting in her usual spot, looked up with a gentle smile. "The hardest part isn't the work, my dear, it's reminding people why it matters." Jenna tilted her head, confused. "What do you mean?" Maggie set her knitting aside and reached for a dusty scrapbook on a nearby shelf. She handed it to Jenna, who opened it to find pages filled with newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes from townspeople expressing their gratitude for past fairs. "This," Maggie said, gesturing to the book, "is what the fair meant to people. It wasn't just about the decorations or the carols. It was about connection, about feeling like we were part of something bigger." Jenna traced her fingers over the worn pages, the stories within reigniting her determination. "I'll try again," she said, her voice firm. "But maybe I'm looking in the wrong places. What if the answer isn't with the people who used to run the fair, but with those who don't even remember it?" That night, Jenna logged onto the local community forum. She crafted a heartfelt post, sharing her vision for the fair and asking for volunteers to help make it a reality. She clicked post and leaned back in her chair, feeling both hopeful and anxious. Just as she was about to log off, a notification popped up. It was an anonymous message that read, "If you want real help, talk to Samuel Carter. He can make things happen." Jenna's heart raced as she stared at the screen. Who was Samuel Carter? And why did this stranger think he held the key to her success? Jenna adjusted her scarf against the biting winter wind, her breath puffing into clouds as she approached Samuel Carter's estate. The grand mansion loomed ahead, its tall iron gates and frosted hedges exuding an air of unapproachability. She tightened her grip on the old scrapbook tucked under her arm, the memories within it offering a small dose of courage. Maggie's words echoed in her mind. "Samuel owes me a favor. Don't let his gruffness fool you." But standing in front of the towering oak doors, Jenna felt a knot of doubt twist in her stomach. What if he didn't care? What if he saw her as just another naive idealist? The door creaked open, revealing a tall, impeccably dressed man with piercing gray eyes. Samuel Carter's presence was commanding, and his expression seemed carved from stone. "You must be Jenna Mitchell," he said, his voice low and measured. "Maggie mentioned you'd be coming." Jenna nodded, her voice momentarily caught in her throat. "Yes, thank you for agreeing to meet me." Samuel stepped aside, motioning her into a vast foyer with high ceilings and polished marble floors. The space felt cold, not just from the drafty air but from the stark, impersonal decor. Jenna's boots squeaked slightly as she followed him into a study lined with bookshelves and dark leather furniture. "So," Samuel began, settling into a chair and steepling his fingers, "you want to revive the Christmas fair?" "Yes," Jenna said, her voice steadier now. "I believe it can bring the community together again, just like it used to." Samuel raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident. "And you think you can pull that off? With no experience, no connections, and little support from the town?" Jenna bristled at his tone but kept her composure. "I'm not saying it will be easy, but I'm willing to put in the work. I've already started reaching out to people and—" "Let me stop you right there," Samuel interrupted, leaning forward. "This isn't about effort, it's about reality. Do you have any idea how much planning and money it takes to organize something like this?" Even back when the fair was thriving, it was a monumental undertaking. Now, the town is different. People don't care anymore. Jenna opened her mouth to argue, but Samuel continued. Don't get me wrong. I admire your enthusiasm. But enthusiasm alone won't get you far. The weight of his words settled heavily on Jenna's shoulders. She looked down at the scrapbook in her lap, hesitating before placing it on the table between them. I brought this, she said, her voice quieter now. It's from Maggie. It's full of memories and notes from people who loved the fair. I know, it mattered to them. And I think it can matter again. Samuel's gaze lingered on the scrapbook, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed and opened it. As he flipped through the pages, his demeanor softened, though only slightly. Maggie always did have a way of making people believe in things, he said, almost to himself. Jenna seized the opportunity. She told me about how you helped the fair when you were younger, how it helped your family. Don't you think it's worth trying to do that for others now? Samuel leaned back, his eyes narrowing. That was a long time ago. The world's different now. But I suppose Maggie wouldn't have sent you here if she didn't think you had a chance. He stood and walked to a tall cabinet, pulling out a stack of old financial reports and blueprints. Placing them on the table, he looked Jenna in the eye. If you're serious about this, prove it, he said. Rally the town. Show me that people still care. Then, and only then, will I consider helping you. Jenna felt a mix of relief and intimidation. She hadn't expected Samuel to agree so easily, but his challenge loomed large. Still, she nodded, her resolve hardening. I'll do it, she said. You'll see. Samuel handed her the reports, his gaze stern but not unkind. Don't waste my time, Jenna. This town doesn't need another empty promise. As Jenna left the estate, the cold air hit her face like a slap, but she didn't feel it. Her mind was already racing with plans, her determination fueled by both the skepticism she had faced and the faint glimmer of hope she had seen in Samuel's eyes. Jenna sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by a chaotic sea of papers. The stack of financial reports Samuel had given her was sprawled across the carpet, each page revealing details of past fairs, expenses, revenue streams, sponsorships. At first it was overwhelming, but as she sifted through the documents, patterns began to emerge. The fairs hadn't just been celebrations, they were lifelines for the community. Local businesses thrived during the events. Non-profits raised significant funds, and families made memories that lasted a lifetime. Jenna's heart swelled as she imagined what it could mean for the struggling town if they could bring it back. This isn't just about nostalgia, she muttered to herself, jotting notes in her notebook. It's about hope. Armed with newfound determination, Jenna decided it was time to try again with the people who had dismissed her earlier. Jenna's first stop was Alan Porter's workshop. The smell of sawdust filled the air as she knocked on the doorframe. Alan looked up from his workbench, his expression unreadable. What now? He grumbled, setting down a half-finished wooden carving. I wanted to show you something, Jenna said, holding out a sheet of paper. This is a sketch of how we could showcase your woodworking at the fair. A booth where people can watch you work and maybe even buy some of your pieces. It's a way to reconnect with the community, Alan. People miss your work. Alan sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I don't know, Jenna. It's been a long time since anyone cared about what I do. But they will, Jenna pressed. You just have to remind them. He didn't say yes, but he also didn't say no. Jenna took it as a small victory. Next, she visited Rose Greenfield's bakery. The warm scent of cinnamon and sugar greeted her as she stepped inside, but the shop was eerily quiet. Rose stood behind the counter, her hands dusted with flour. I'm not here to bother you, Jenna said quickly, sensing Rose's hesitation. I just wanted to share an idea. What if we hosted baking workshops at the fair? Kids could decorate cookies, learn recipes. Your shop would get exposure and people would see how special it is. Rose wiped her hands on her apron, considering the idea. It's not a bad thought, she admitted, but it's a lot of work. I can help organize it, Jenna offered. You won't have to do it alone. I'll think about it, Rose said, her tone cautious but not dismissive. At the local community center, Jenna found a group of high school students working on art projects. Among them was Mia, a 17-year-old with vibrant pink streaks in her hair and a sketchbook full of designs. This is amazing, Jenna said, flipping through Mia's work. Would you be interested in helping design posters and flyers for the fair? Mia's eyes lit up. You mean like real promotional materials? That would look great in my portfolio. Exactly, Jenna said, and it would give the fair a fresh, modern look. I'm in, Mia said with a grin. This town could use some excitement. Not all meetings went as smoothly. When Jenna approached Peter Chang, the schoolteacher, he crossed his arms and shook his head before she could even finish her pitch. Arts and music don't matter to this town anymore, he said bitterly. Why should I waste my time? Jenna tried to reason with him. If we can show the town what the arts bring to the community, maybe we can start to change that mindset. Peter scoffed. Good luck with that. His refusal stung, but Jenna reminded herself that not everyone would see the vision right away. Later that evening, Jenna sat at Maggie's kitchen table, recounting the day's events. Maggie listened intently, her knitting needles clicking softly. You're making progress, Maggie said encouragingly. Not fast enough, Jenna replied. People are so hesitant. It's like they've forgotten what it's like to hope for something good. Maggie reached for a faded blueprint on the counter and spread it out. Then we'll remind them, she said. The blueprint depicted the layout of the old fairgrounds, complete with labels for each booth and activity. Jenna leaned closer, studying the intricate details. This is incredible, she whispered. If you're serious about this, Maggie said, her tone firm, we'll need to bring this back to life. It won't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever is. Jenna nodded, her resolve hardening. Let's do it. Jenna stepped onto the cracked pavement of the old fairgrounds, her boots crunching against the overgrown weeds poking through the asphalt. Beside her, Maggie clutched her coat tightly against the brisk autumn wind. The once vibrant space was now unrecognizable. Rusted fences leaned at odd angles, faded banners hung limply from poles, and debris littered the area like forgotten remnants of a happier time. This used to be the heart of the town, Maggie murmured, her voice tinged with melancholy. She bent down to pick up a broken ornament from the ground, a small silver star dulled by years of exposure. This was part of the tree lighting ceremony. It's been here all these years. Jenna watched as Maggie's fingers brushed over the star, her eyes misty with memories. It must have been beautiful back then, Jenna said softly. It was, Maggie replied. Families gathered here every year. The children's choir sang carols, vendors lined the streets with their crafts and treats, and at the end of the night, we lit the tree. The whole town seemed to glow. Jenna felt a pang of guilt for not remembering the fair more vividly. She had been too young to truly appreciate it before it faded into history. But standing here now, she could feel the weight of what had been lost and the enormity of the task ahead. As they continued exploring, they stumbled upon a man hunched over a pile of lumber near the edge of the grounds. His weathered face and sturdy frame gave him an air of quiet authority. Jenna recognized him from town, Mark Jensen, a local handyman known for his skill but also his gruff demeanor. What are you doing here? Mark asked, straightening up and eyeing them warily. We're planning to bring the Christmas fair back, Jenna said, her tone confident despite his skeptical gaze. This place has been abandoned long enough, Mark snorted. This place is a lost cause. I'm clearing it for a new development project, some condos or something. Maggie stepped forward, her voice firm but kind. Mark, this isn't just an empty lot. It's a piece of our town's history. Do you remember the auction we held here to save your family's farm? Mark's expression softened, and he shifted uncomfortably. That was a long time ago, Maggie. Doesn't mean it doesn't matter, Maggie countered. You could help us bring it back. Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Fine, I'll help fix some of the structures, but don't expect miracles. Thank you, Jenna said sincerely. That means more than you know. Back at Maggie's house, Jenna spread out the blueprint of the fairgrounds on the kitchen table. It was faded and torn in places, but the layout was still legible. Maggie pointed to each section, describing how the fair had been organized: the vendor stalls, the choir stage, the central tree, and the dining area. This is where it all happened, Maggie said, tracing her finger along the page. We'll need to rebuild most of it. Jenna nodded, jotting down notes. I'll include this in the proposal for Samuel. He needs to see that we're serious. As they worked, Maggie made phone calls to old acquaintances, her voice animated as she explained their plans. Some were hesitant, but a few expressed interest in getting involved. Jenna couldn't help but smile at Maggie's enthusiasm. It was contagious. The next day, Jenna faced her first real pushback. A local business owner scoffed when she pitched the idea of the fair. No one has time for a fair, he said dismissively. People are barely making ends meet. Jenna's confidence wavered, but she remembered Maggie's words. If you can remind people why this matters, they'll come around. She resolved to keep pushing, even if it meant more rejections. That evening, as she and Maggie locked up the fairgrounds, Jenna's phone buzzed. It was Mia. "You're going to want to see this," Mia said excitedly. "I just posted about the fair online, and people are already commenting." Jenna's heart raced as she opened the community forum. The post was a simple announcement about their plans, but it had already garnered dozens of responses, some enthusiastic, others skeptical. "This is just the beginning," Jenna said, determination flickering in her eyes. The community forum buzzed with activity as Jenna refreshed the page. Comments ranged from nostalgic recollections of past fairs to outright skepticism. "This town hasn't had a proper Christmas in decades," one user posted. Another replied, "It's a sweet idea, but who's going to pay for it?" Despite the naysayers, Jenna couldn't ignore the growing number of people chiming in with supportive messages. "I remember the Christmas fair. It was magical," one local shared, sparking a thread of fond memories. For the first time in weeks, Jenna felt like she wasn't alone in this endeavor. Mia arrived at Maggie's house later that afternoon, clutching a folder of designs. Her hands trembled slightly as she laid the pages on the kitchen table. "I didn't have much time," Mia said, her voice hesitant. "But I tried to capture what you described." Jenna and Maggie leaned in, their eyes widening as they took in the vibrant designs. The posters depicted a snow-dusted fairground, children holding candy canes, and a glowing Christmas tree in the center. "These are incredible," Jenna said, grinning. Maggie nodded in agreement, her eyes twinkling. "You have a real talent, Mia." The young girl blushed, her confidence visibly growing under their praise. "I could refine them more, if you think they're worth it." "They're more than worth it," Jenna replied. "They're going to bring people back." The first community meeting was held at the local center, a modest building with flickering fluorescent lights. Jenna glanced nervously at the clock as people trickled in. By the end of the hour, around 15 individuals filled the chairs, a mix of older residents and a few younger faces. Grace Mitchell, a mother of two, spoke up first. "I used to bring my kids to the fair before it ended. It's about time we had something like this again." Others weren't as convinced. "What's the plan if no one shows up?" asked an older man in the back row. His tone was skeptical, but Jenna saw genuine concern in his eyes. Before Jenna could respond, the door creaked open, and Alan Porter stepped inside. His presence silenced the room. "Don't make me regret this," he muttered as he took a seat, but the faint smile tugging at his lips hinted at a growing belief in the project. The meeting ended on a hopeful note, but Jenna's optimism was short-lived. That evening, she received an email from Samuel Carter. His feedback was thorough, detailing critical gaps in her budget and logistical planning. "This proposal lacks a contingency plan and adequate funding sources," Samuel wrote. "If you can't address these issues, you risk the entire project falling apart." Jenna stared at the screen, her stomach sinking. The email felt like a blow to her confidence. She spent hours reviewing the proposal, her insecurities gnawing at her resolve. The next morning, Jenna confided in Maggie, her voice trembling. "Maybe I'm not the right person for this. What if everyone's right? What if I fail?" Maggie placed a comforting hand on Jenna's shoulder. "Every great idea faces resistance. The question is, are you willing to fight for it?" Jenna nodded slowly, Maggie's words igniting a flicker of determination. "I'll fight," she said softly. "I have to." That evening, as Jenna sat down to revise the proposal, her phone buzzed. It was Rose Greenfield. Her voice was frantic. "Jenna, there's a problem at the bakery. I don't think I can help with the fair anymore." Heart racing, Jenna grabbed her coat and rushed out the door. The bakery's lights glowed faintly in the distance, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a new challenge. Jenna hurried to Rose's bakery, her mind racing with possibilities. The sight that greeted her was disheartening. Rose was seated at a table, her face buried in her hands, flour smudged across her apron. The sweet aroma of baked goods hung in the air, but the stillness of the space made it feel hollow. Rose looked up as Jenna entered, her eyes red from tears. "It's over, Jenna," she said, her voice trembling. "The oven's completely busted. I can't fill my holiday orders, let alone contribute to the fair." Jenna pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "We'll figure this out," she said firmly. You've helped this town for years. It's time the town helps you. The next morning, Jenna reached out to Grace Mitchell and the other volunteers from the community center meeting. Within hours, they had gathered outside the bakery, brainstorming solutions. Mark Jensen, who had been tinkering with the bakery's oven, emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a rag. "The oven's repairable," he announced gruffly, "but it'll take a few days and the parts aren't cheap." Jenna glanced around at the assembled group. "What if we organize a bake sale? Rose still has supplies, right? We can sell whatever she's got left and raise the money for the repairs." Grace nodded enthusiastically. "We can spread the word on social media and around town. People love a good bake sale." Rose, standing in the doorway, hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden," she said softly. "You're not a burden," Jenna replied. "You're part of this community. Let us do this for you." By midday, the bake sale was in full swing. Tables laden with cookies, cakes, and pies lined the sidewalk outside the bakery. Grace's children handed out flyers, while Mia snapped photos for the event's social media page. Jenna felt a spark of hope as familiar faces began to appear. Neighbors, old friends, and even a few skeptics from the community center meeting. Among them was Darlene Shaw, a retired seamstress who approached Jenna with a tray of handmade ornaments. "These were for my grandkids," Darlene said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "But I'd like to donate them to the fair." Jenna smiled warmly. "Thank you, Darlene. Every little bit helps." As the afternoon wore on, Jenna found herself bonding with more townspeople. Carlos Reyes, a college student studying event management, stopped by to purchase a pie and ended up volunteering to help organize logistics for the fair. "You've got a good thing going here," Carlos said, tapping his clipboard. "With the right planning, this fair could be incredible." But not everyone shared his enthusiasm. Jenna overheard a group of townspeople murmuring near the edge of the crowd. "It's a nice gesture," one of them said, "but it won't fix the real problems in this town." Their words stung, but Jenna pushed the doubts aside. She focused on the people who believed in her vision, the ones who had shown up to help. That evening, Jenna and Maggie sat in the bakery's back room, counting the day's earnings. Rose watched from across the table, a grateful smile on her face. "This is more than enough for the repairs," Rose said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Jenna replied. "Your baked goods brought everyone together today. That's what this fair is about, bringing people together." Later that night, Jenna received a message from Samuel Carter. "I'll be at the fairgrounds tomorrow," it read. "Show me what you've got." Jenna stared at the screen, her heart pounding. This was her chance to prove the fair's worth, not just to Samuel, but to herself and the entire town. Jenna sat at her kitchen table, the clock ticking toward midnight. Papers covered the surface, detailed budgets, event timelines, and notes from her conversations with volunteers. Her laptop hummed softly, a spreadsheet glowing on the screen. Jenna took a deep breath, reviewing Samuel's criticisms from his email. His words echoed in her mind. "If you can't address these issues, you risk the entire project falling apart." Maggie, seated across from her with a steaming cup of tea, offered a gentle smile. "You've come this far, Jenna. Show him the heart of this town. He might be tough, but deep down, Samuel remembers what this fair once meant." Jenna nodded, drawing strength from Maggie's encouragement. "I just hope I can convince him." The next morning, Jenna arrived at the fairgrounds, clutching her binder of revised plans. The space was eerily quiet, the once vibrant grounds now overgrown with weeds and littered with debris. Rusted poles from old stalls jutted out of the ground, and the skeletal remains of the main stage stood as a haunting reminder of what used to be. Samuel Carter pulled up in a sleek black car, stepping out with the air of someone used to commanding attention. His tailored suit and polished shoes contrasted sharply with the surroundings. He surveyed the fairgrounds with a critical eye, his expression unreadable. "Miss Mitchell," Samuel greeted, his tone neutral. "You asked for this meeting. Let's see what you've got." Jenna led Samuel through the fairgrounds, using the decayed structures as visual aids. She gestured toward the empty spaces, her voice filled with passion. "This is where the vendor stalls will go. We'll highlight local businesses, bakers, craftsmen, artisans, giving them a platform to connect with the community." She pointed to the skeletal stage. "The choir will perform here, along with local musicians. It'll bring families together for the tree lighting ceremony." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to fund all of this? Your previous proposal had glaring gaps." Jenna handed him her updated binder. I've revised the budget and included contingency plans. I've identified potential sponsors and calculated expected revenue from ticket sales and vendor fees. Samuel flipped through the binder, his expression impassive. You've addressed some concerns, but this is still ambitious. What's your contingency plan if attendance is lower than expected? Jenna hesitated but stood her ground. I don't have all the answers yet, but I believe in this town. If we can remind people of what this fair stands for, they'll come together. Their conversation was interrupted by the rumble of an old pickup truck. Mark Jensen hopped out, followed by a group of volunteers carrying tools and trash bags. Without a word, they began clearing debris from the grounds. Among them were Alan Porter and Mia, their determination evident as they worked alongside Mark. Samuel watched the scene unfold, his skepticism giving way to curiosity. They came here on their own? He asked. Jenna nodded. This isn't just my vision, it's theirs too. They want to see this happen. For the first time, Samuel's demeanor softened. He closed the binder and turned to Jenna. You've got potential, but potential isn't enough. I'll provide partial funding, but on one condition: secure additional sponsorships within 2 weeks. Show me that this event has real support. Jenna's heart raced, a mix of relief and pressure. I won't let you down. As Samuel prepared to leave, Maggie called out from the far end of the grounds. She had been exploring an old storage shed and emerged holding a dusty wooden box. Jenna, she said, her voice tinged with emotion, you need to see this. Inside the box were photographs, handwritten notes, and mementos from past fairs. Maggie pulled out a faded photo of the fairgrounds in its prime. Families laughing, children playing, and lights twinkling in the trees. She handed it to Jenna, her eyes shining. This is what you're fighting for. Jenna stared at the photo, her determination reigniting. The image wasn't just a glimpse of the past, it was a promise of what could be. Jenna stood at the counter of Tom Willis's hardware store, clutching a folder of promotional materials and budgets. Tom leaned back in his chair, a skeptical frown crossing his face. You're asking for a lot, Jenna, he said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Jenna nodded, her voice steady but imploring. I know it's a big ask, Mr. Willis, but the fair isn't just about nostalgia. It's about giving the community something to rally around. Imagine families coming back here to buy tools for their holiday crafts or repairs because they remembered your generosity. Tom glanced at the folder again, the skepticism fading into a faint smile. All right, he said, I'll donate the lumber and nails for the stage, but don't let this go to waste, kid. Buoyed by her first success, Jenna approached a regional bank next, where she pitched the idea of sponsorship in exchange for prominent advertising opportunities at the fair. To her relief, the bank's representative agreed to contribute a modest sum to cover printing and promotional costs. But not every meeting went as planned. At a corporate office on the outskirts of town, a representative from a major retailer leaned back in their chair, barely hiding their disdain. The fair's a nice idea, but it's not aligned with our brand strategy. Small-town events don't generate the kind of impact we're looking for. Jenna bit back her frustration, forcing a polite smile. Thank you for your time, she said, leaving the office with a heavy heart. Mia's promotional posters brought a spark of hope. Jenna and Maggie distributed them around town, hanging them in storefronts, the community center, and even the library. The designs captured the charm of the fair with vibrant illustrations of twinkling lights, families gathered around, and steaming cups of cocoa. People are starting to talk, Maggie said with a knowing smile as they returned to the car. That evening, Jenna hosted another volunteer meeting at the community center. To her surprise, the room was packed with twice as many people as before. Grace Mitchell, now fully committed, brought her children, who eagerly raised their hands to help with decorations. Even Peter Chang, the initially hesitant teacher, showed up. I've been thinking about ways we can involve the kids, Peter said, outlining ideas for a youth choir and art competition. Jenna beamed, her enthusiasm contagious, but not everyone was supportive. At the local diner the next morning, Jenna overheard a heated conversation at the next table. This fair's just a distraction, one man muttered. What we need are real solutions, not nostalgia. Another nodded in agreement. It's a waste of resources. What's the point? Jenna clenched her fists, the sting of their words cutting deep. But Maggie's voice echoed in her mind. The question is, are you willing to fight for it? Determined to address the negativity head-on, Jenna organized an open forum at the community center. The turnout was larger than expected, with both supporters and skeptics filling the room. Jenna stood at the front, her nerves on edge but her resolve firm. One man raised his hand. "What happens if this fails? Are you prepared for the backlash?" Jenna took a deep breath. "I can't guarantee success, but I can promise you this. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this because I believe this town deserves to feel connected again." The room was silent for a moment before an older man, Harold Blake, stood up. His voice was thick with emotion. "When my wife was sick years ago, this fair was the only time we felt like we weren't alone. It brought us joy when we needed it most. We need this now more than ever." Applause rippled through the crowd, and Jenna felt a renewed sense of purpose. As the forum concluded, Jenna's phone buzzed with an email notification. She opened it to find a message from Lila Hart, a renowned local artist. "Your passion reminds me of why I started creating in the first place. Let's make something unforgettable. I'd love to design a centerpiece sculpture for the fair." Jenna's heart swelled with gratitude and hope. The pieces were coming together, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Jenna's car rumbled down a winding dirt road, the GPS pointing her toward the outskirts of town. The converted barn appeared suddenly, bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon sunlight. She parked and stepped out, the crunch of gravel underfoot breaking the serene silence. This was Lila Hart's sanctuary, a space as mysterious as the artist herself. The barn door creaked open, and Jenna was greeted by the sight of sculptures in various stages of completion. An abstract metal phoenix, a wooden figure carved with intricate patterns, and an array of materials stacked haphazardly against the walls. Amidst the creative chaos stood Lila Hart, her paint-streaked overalls a testament to her work. "You must be Jenna," Lila said, her voice sharp yet welcoming. "I usually avoid these community projects, but Maggie speaks highly of you, and she's not one to waste words." Jenna extended a hand, which Lila shook briefly before motioning her inside. "Come on, let's talk about this sculpture you want so badly." They settled at a long wooden table cluttered with sketches and jars of paintbrushes. Lila wasted no time diving into her vision. "We need something that speaks to the soul of this town," she began, sketching a rough outline. "A tree, massive, sprawling, made from salvaged materials. Each branch will hold objects contributed by the community, hopes, memories, dreams, whatever people want to leave behind or carry forward." Jenna was struck by the idea. "That's beautiful," she said, her mind already racing with possibilities. "But how do we make it happen? The fair is only a few weeks away." Lila's gaze hardened. "That's your problem. I'm here to create. You want it memorable? Let me make it." The collaboration quickly hit its first roadblock. As the days passed, Lila's insistence on total artistic control clashed with Jenna's practical concerns. "We need to ensure the community feels included," Jenna argued one evening, pointing to Lila's detailed plans. "This isn't just about the art, it's about the people." Lila threw down her pencil, her patience clearly fraying. "Do you want art or do you want a committee project? You can't have both." The tension was thick and Jenna felt her frustration bubbling over. "This tree has to mean something to everyone, not just you. Otherwise, what's the point?" Mia, who had been quietly working on promotional designs in the corner, finally spoke up. "Why not do both?" she suggested. "Let the community contribute materials and ideas, but keep the overall design yours, Lila. That way, it's personal to everyone." The room fell silent as both women considered the compromise. Lila sighed, brushing a stray curl from her face. "Fine, but no junk. If people want to contribute, it better be meaningful." With a plan in place, Jenna organized a materials drive, urging townspeople to bring items for the sculpture. The response was overwhelming. Families arrived with boxes of old tools, trinkets, and even handwritten letters. One elderly woman, Eleanor Jacobs, handed Jenna a faded book of poetry. "This belonged to my husband," she said, her voice trembling. The fair was the only time he ever read his poems aloud. Jenna's heart swelled as she watched the pile of contributions grow, each item carrying a story, a memory, a piece of the town's heart. As the sculpture began to take shape, Lila's barn buzzed with activity. Volunteers came to help sort and assemble the materials, their laughter and chatter filling the once quiet space. Lila, though still guarded, started to soften. "This tree will stand as a testament to what this town can build together," she said one evening, her voice tinged with pride. Jenna felt a renewed sense of purpose. The tree wasn't just a centerpiece, it was a symbol of everything the fair represented. As she ran her fingers over a polished branch adorned with trinkets, she whispered, "This is what we're fighting for." The tranquility of the moment was shattered by Jenna's phone ringing. Maggie's voice came through, urgent and strained. "Jenna, you need to get to the fairgrounds now. There's been a major setback." Jenna's stomach dropped. "What happened?" she asked, already grabbing her coat. "I'll explain when you get here," Maggie said. "Just hurry." Jenna hung up, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. She turned to Lila, who had been watching her with concern. "Something's wrong," Jenna said, her voice trembling. "I have to go." Lila nodded. "Go. We'll keep working." As Jenna drove toward the fairgrounds, her heart pounded with anxiety. Whatever awaited her, she knew it could make or break everything they'd worked for. Jenna's car skidded to a stop at the fairgrounds, her headlights illuminating the devastation. The storm had turned the once promising space into a scene of chaos. Branches lay scattered across the grounds, one massive limb crushing the stage's half-completed frame. Pools of muddy water stretched across the field, and tents set up by volunteers sagged under the weight of rainwater. A cold knot of despair formed in her stomach. Stepping out of the car, Jenna pulled her coat tighter against the biting wind. Volunteers stood in clusters, their faces a mixture of frustration and exhaustion. Alan Porter was hunched over a fallen beam, inspecting the damage with a grim expression. Maggie approached Jenna, her eyes filled with concern. "It looks worse than it is," Maggie said, though her tone betrayed her own doubts. Jenna bit her lip, fighting back tears. "Maybe they were right," she whispered. "This is too much for one person to handle." Maggie placed a steadying hand on Jenna's shoulder. "You're right, it is too much for one person, but it's not supposed to be just you. That's the whole point of this, Jenna. The fair isn't yours alone, it's everyone's." Determined to salvage what she could, Jenna called for an emergency meeting. Volunteers gathered under a makeshift canopy, shaking off rain and mud. The air buzzed with tension, doubts hanging heavy in the damp night. Jenna took a deep breath before stepping into the center of the group. "I know this looks bad," she began, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "But this storm isn't the end. It's a chance to prove what we're capable of. The fair isn't just an event, it's us showing the world who we are." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. Alan stepped forward, clearing his throat. "The stage can be fixed," he said, his gruff voice softer than usual. "Didn't think I'd be back here, but you proved me wrong, kid." Jenna's words lit a spark. Volunteers scattered, assessing damage and organizing repairs. Alan led a team to stabilize the stage frame, his skilled hands moving with surprising precision. Grace Mitchell corralled her children and other teens to clear debris, while Mia documented the efforts with her camera, sharing updates online to rally more support. Despite the progress, Jenna felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She watched as Maggie worked alongside a group of retired community members, their laughter and stories cutting through the tension. It reminded Jenna of why she'd started this journey, but it also reminded her of how much was still at stake. By late afternoon, Jenna and Mia stumbled upon an idea while surveying the flooded areas. What if the water, instead of being a problem, became a feature? Inspired, they pitched the concept of a reflection pond to the group, a serene space where attendees could float candles inscribed with wishes or messages of hope. The idea was met with immediate enthusiasm. Volunteers quickly worked to clear debris from the largest flooded area, transforming it into a makeshift pond. Maggie, overseeing the effort, smiled knowingly at Jenna. "Sometimes setbacks are just opportunities in disguise," she said. As the day drew to a close, the fairgrounds began to show signs of life again. The stage stood repaired, the reflection pond sparkled under the evening light, and the volunteers, though tired, seemed invigorated. Jenna allowed herself a brief moment of relief as she surveyed the progress. This wasn't just about the fair anymore. It was about proving that the town could overcome anything, together. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. It was an email from Samuel Carter. The subject line read, "Urgent, we need to talk." Jenna's heart sank as she read the cryptic message. Financial complications, jeopardizing the fair. Her chest tightened, but she knew there was no turning back now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she'd be ready to face them. Jenna sat across from Samuel in his sleek, minimalist office, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "The sponsors pulled out," he said, his voice matter-of-fact but tinged with regret. "Corporate budget cuts. They've had to reevaluate their priorities. Jenna's breath hitched as she tried to process the news. But without them, the funding gap, Samuel nodded. It's critical. I'm not saying it's impossible to bridge, but without their contribution, the fair might not make it. For a moment, Jenna felt the room closing in around her. The meticulously organized financial plans she had built in her mind now seemed like a house of cards. She fought to steady her voice. This isn't just about numbers, Samuel. This fair means something to this town. Samuel leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. I get that, but sentiment doesn't pay bills. If you're serious about this, you need a backup plan. Fast. The walk back to Maggie's house was a blur of cold air and mounting anxiety. Jenna clenched her phone tightly, already scrolling through her list of contacts. She needed a solution, and quickly. Maggie greeted her at the door, sensing the storm brewing inside Jenna's mind. He said I might lose the fair, Jenna admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Maggie didn't hesitate. You've faced worse, Jenna. Now's the time to get creative. The next morning, armed with determination and a fresh cup of coffee, Jenna set to work. She spent hours on the phone, pitching the fair to potential donors. Each call felt like a battle. Some listened politely but declined, citing overcommitted budgets or lack of interest. Others dismissed her outright, calling the project too small-scale to matter. But amidst the rejection came glimmers of hope. Tom Willis from the hardware store pledged additional materials, and a regional bank expressed tentative interest in a sponsorship. It wasn't much, but it was something. Jenna turned to the community next. With Mia's help, she launched a crowdfunding campaign online, complete with heartwarming photos and stories about the fair's history. Lila Hart contributed a video showcasing her sculpture, describing its symbolism and urging people to support the cause. The video quickly gained traction, with shares and comments flooding in. Despite the progress, the pressure was taking its toll. Jenna's parents dropped by unexpectedly, their concern written all over their faces. You're wearing yourself thin, Jenna, her mother said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Maybe it's time to scale back. The fair doesn't have to be perfect. Jenna shook her head, her voice firm. This fair isn't just about me. It's about proving that this town can achieve something incredible. I won't stop now. Her father exchanged a glance with her mother but said nothing. Jenna could see the worry in their eyes, but she had made her decision. That evening, Mia burst into Jenna's makeshift office, her eyes wide with excitement. A regional news station called. They want to do a story on the fair. Jenna's heart leapt. This could be the break they needed. She quickly agreed to the interview, knowing the exposure could attract more donors. But as the euphoria faded, she realized how high the stakes had become. The fair's success, or failure, would soon be on display for the entire region to see. As the clock neared midnight, Jenna refreshed the crowdfunding page for the 100th time. The total climbed slowly, each donation accompanied by a message of support. But as encouraging as the words were, the gap between their current funds and their goal loomed large. A new comment caught her eye. It was short and cryptic. I might have a solution. Let's meet tomorrow. Jenna stared at the screen, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Who was this person, and could they really help? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she knew one thing for sure. She'd find out tomorrow. The sun barely peeked over the horizon as Jenna pulled into the coffee shop parking lot. Her stomach churned with a mix of anticipation and unease. The message from the mysterious commenter had been vague, but its implications weighed heavily on her. Inside, she spotted a man sitting at a corner table, a tailored suit, a commanding presence, and an air of wealth that felt out of place in the small-town cafe. Jenna Mitchell? He greeted, extending a hand. I'm Elliot Briggs. She nodded, shaking his hand. Thank you for reaching out. Your message mentioned a solution? Elliot leaned back, his confidence palpable. I followed your crowdfunding campaign. You've stirred something here, admirable, really. I'd like to help fill your funding gap. Jenna's heart skipped a beat. That's generous. But, he interrupted, his tone turning sharp, I don't give without expecting something in return. I want prominent branding for my business, banners, a booth, and my logo on every piece of promotional material. Jenna froze. The fair was meant to be a celebration of community, not a corporate billboard. This isn't just a marketing opportunity, she replied, choosing her words carefully. It's about bringing people together. Elliot smiled, a mix of amusement and challenge in his expression. Think it over. You've got my number. Back at Maggie's house, Jenna relayed the meeting to her closest allies. Maggie listened intently, her teacup poised mid-air. Elliot's kind don't often give without strings. Be careful, Jenna. Don't let this fair lose its soul. Samuel, ever pragmatic, countered. You're not running a charity auction. Sometimes you have to bend to make things happen. Lila, seated quietly in the corner, suddenly stood. Bend too far and you'll break. Her voice was sharp, her expression stormy. She left the room without another word. Jenna sighed, the weight of their conflicting advice pressing down on her. What would you do, Maggie? Maggie's eyes softened. This is your fair, Jenna. Trust your instincts. That evening, unable to sleep, Jenna wandered the fairgrounds. The once abandoned space was slowly transforming, though remnants of its decay remained. A faint light flickered near the vendor stalls. She approached cautiously, surprised to find Alan Porter working alone, hammer in hand. Alan? She called softly. He turned, his gruff exterior slightly softened by the dim light. Figured this stall could use some fixing up. Thought I'd save you the trouble. Jenna hesitated, unsure what to say. Alan broke the silence. You know, this fair saved my family once. My wife and I were close to losing the farm. Maggie organized a charity auction that kept us afloat. He met Jenna's gaze. You've already brought us this far. Don't let anyone take that away. His words lingered as she returned home. That night, her decision crystallized. The next morning, Jenna met Elliot at his downtown office. His desk was immaculate, every surface screaming wealth and power. I've thought about your offer, she began, her voice steady. I appreciate your generosity, but the fair isn't just about sponsorships. It's about unity. Elliot raised an eyebrow. And? I'll recognize your business as a sponsor, but the branding will be understated and aligned with the fair's theme. No banners, no corporate booths, just a simple acknowledgement of your support. For a moment, she feared he'd laugh her out of the room. Instead, Elliot leaned forward, a wry smile forming. You've got guts, Jenna. I respect that. Deal. The news of the secured funding ignited the community. At the next volunteer meeting, Jenna shared the update, her voice filled with newfound confidence. Applause erupted, and the energy in the room felt electric. Lila stood at the back, holding a large cloth-covered object. I've been working on this, she announced, unveiling her nearly completed sculpture. The intricate tree, adorned with salvaged materials contributed by the community, stood as a testament to their collective effort. This isn't just my art, it's ours. Tears pricked Jenna's eyes as the volunteers marveled at the piece. For the first time, she felt the fair's success wasn't just a possibility, it was a certainty. As the meeting ended, a clap of thunder echoed in the distance. Jenna glanced at her phone. A weather alert blared across the screen. Severe storm warning for the weekend. Her heart sank. Another obstacle loomed, threatening everything they had built. The storm came with an intensity that no forecast could have fully prepared them for. Jenna stared out of her apartment window, watching sheets of rain blur the streetlights. A text from Maggie buzzed her phone. The fairgrounds are flooding. We need you here. Without hesitation, Jenna grabbed her raincoat and headed into the chaos. The drive through the storm was harrowing. Winds buffeted her car, and fallen branches littered the road. By the time she arrived, the fairgrounds were nearly unrecognizable. Floodwaters pooled around the vendor stalls, and the stage lay partially collapsed under the weight of a massive fallen branch. Maggie stood at the edge of the grounds, her umbrella flapping uselessly in the wind. Alan Porter was already knee-deep in water trying to secure loose boards from the stage. Volunteers scrambled to salvage what they could, their faces etched with frustration and despair. Jenna, we're losing it, a young volunteer shouted, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Jenna swallowed hard, the enormity of the situation crashing over her like the rain. No, she said, her voice steady despite the storm. We've come too far to let this stop us. Jenna pulled her core team together, Alan, Mia, Maggie, and Lila, under the partial shelter of an old vendor stall. What do we prioritize? Alan asked, his hands already blistered from hours of work. The stage needs to be stabilized, or we'll have no performances, Jenna replied, her mind racing. Mia, can you organize a team to clear the vendor spaces? Lila, is there any way to protect the sculpture? Lila nodded, her face pale but determined. I'll figure something out. The group dispersed, each taking on their tasks with grim resolve. Jenna tried to reassure herself that she was doing the right thing, but doubt gnawed at her as she saw some volunteers quietly pack up and leave, disheartened by the destruction. Despite the setbacks, glimmers of resilience began to emerge. Alan, soaked to the bone, barked orders at younger volunteers, guiding them in shoring up the stage's framework. "We're not giving up now," he growled, his gruff exterior masking the pride he felt in their efforts. Mia, undeterred by the muddy chaos, organized a small team to clear debris from the vendor stalls. Her energy was infectious, and even the most reluctant volunteers found themselves swept up in her determination. Lila worked with quiet intensity, wrapping the sculpture in waterproof sheeting and adding makeshift supports to prevent it from toppling. At one point, she paused to look at Jenna and said, "This storm won't destroy us. It'll make us stronger." As the storm began to wane, Jenna slipped into her car for a moment of solitude. Her raincoat was soaked through and her hands trembled from exhaustion. A text from her mother appeared on her screen. "Proud of you no matter what happens." Tears welled in Jenna's eyes. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. The fair was bigger than her, bigger than any one person. It was about proving to the town, and to herself, that they could endure. With renewed determination, she stepped out of the car, ready to face whatever came next. By the time the rain eased, the fairgrounds had begun to take shape again. The stage, though battered, stood firm thanks to Alan and his team. The vendor spaces were cleared, and Lila's sculpture remained intact, its makeshift coverings gleaming with raindrops. Jenna called everyone together, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into her face. This storm wasn't just a test of our preparations, it was a test of us, and we proved that we can weather anything together. The volunteers erupted into cheers, their spirits lifted by her words. For the first time that night, Jenna felt the faint flicker of hope. Just as the group began to disperse, Jenna's phone buzzed. It was a call from the regional news station. Her stomach tightened as she answered. "We've got a problem," the producer said. "The storm caused flooding on our end, and our crew might not be able to make it to the fair. I'll keep you updated, but I wanted to give you a heads up." Jenna stared at her phone as the call ended, her mind racing. Without the news crew, the fair's outreach could fall short. Another hurdle loomed, but Jenna refused to let despair take hold. There had to be a way forward. The aftermath of the storm was nothing short of daunting. As Jenna stood in the middle of the fairgrounds, surrounded by half-collapsed tents and muddy vendor stalls, she took a deep breath, willing herself to focus. The fair was too close, and giving up wasn't an option. Jenna gathered her core team in Maggie's living room, the cozy firelight contrasting with the tension in the room. Alan crossed his arms, his face set in a scowl. Mia tapped her pen against her notebook, waiting for Jenna to speak. Maggie, ever the steady presence, handed out mugs of steaming tea. "We need to adapt," Jenna began, her voice steady despite the exhaustion tugging at her. "The storm knocked out our news coverage, and the fairgrounds need serious repairs. But this doesn't mean we stop. It means we think creatively." Maggie leaned forward. "Why not use what we have? We may not have the news crew, but we have something just as powerful. Social media." Mia's eyes lit up. "We could live stream the fair. My cousin has some equipment we can use, and I know a couple of friends who'd help with the tech." "That's brilliant," Jenna said, feeling a spark of hope. "If we market it right, we can get people to tune in and share it widely." The room buzzed with energy as they brainstormed, assigning tasks and mapping out logistics. Maggie suggested they involve local businesses to help spread the word. Alan offered his truck to haul equipment, his gruff demeanor softening as he said, "It's about time this old town gets back on its feet." The next day, the fairgrounds were alive with activity. Vendors worked to adapt their setups to the new conditions. One musician moved his performance to a small tent, promising, "Rain or shine, the show will go on." Rose repurposed her damaged bakery booth into a charming dessert cart, her cheerful demeanor lifting everyone's spirits. Lila stood by her sculpture, her hands caked with mud and paint as she added finishing touches. "The storm is part of the story now," she explained to Jenna. "This piece will remind people that beauty can come from chaos." Jenna felt a swell of gratitude as she watched the community come together. Her parents arrived with a trunk full of supplies, their faces lighting up with pride as they saw how much progress had been made. "You're doing something incredible here, Jenna," her father said, clapping her on the shoulder. As the live stream teaser went live, the response was immediate. Local businesses shared it on their pages, and residents began commenting with excitement. Mia worked tirelessly, capturing behind-the-scenes footage and updating the event's social media. "We've got this," she said, her confidence infectious. Alan surprised everyone by donating lumber from his farm to rebuild the stage. As he unloaded the wood, he muttered, "This fair gave me hope once. I figure it's time to return the favor." Jenna smiled, knowing how much this gesture meant coming from him. The fairgrounds began to transform, the hard work of the community breathing life back into the space. Volunteers hung decorations, repaired booths, and set up lights that twinkled against the evening sky. The sculpture stood tall in the center, a testament to the town's resilience. As dusk fell, Jenna gathered the volunteers for a moment of gratitude. "None of this would be possible without all of you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "This isn't just a fair. It's proof of what we can accomplish when we come together." Cheers erupted, and Jenna felt the weight of the past few days lift slightly. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that they might actually pull this off. Later that evening, as Jenna reviewed the final checklist, a notification popped up on her phone. It was an email from Elliot Briggs. The subject line read, "I have a surprise for you tomorrow." Curious and slightly apprehensive, Jenna opened the message. Elliot's words were cryptic but intriguing. "It's something I think you'll want the world to see." Her mind raced with possibilities as she prepared for what could be the most pivotal day of her life. As we conclude this heartfelt journey of resilience and community, Jenna's story reminds us of a timeless truth. True strength lies in unity and the courage to face challenges head-on. Her determination to bring a small town together through a seemingly simple event, reviving a fair, transcended personal ambition, showcasing the transformative power of shared purpose and human connection. This story invites us to reflect on our own communities. What traditions have we let slip away, and how might rekindling them bring us closer together? What role can each of us play in fostering unity, even when the odds seem stacked against us? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences and ideas in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to our channel. We're dedicated to sharing more inspiring tales of hope, courage, and the human spirit. Let's continue to explore these meaningful narratives together, because every story has the power to change hearts and minds. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video to help us spread positivity far and wide. And as always, thank you for being part of this journey with us. See you in the next story.